My name is Tomohide Yasuda, and the title of my talk is The Role of Policy Academics in Guarding Failing Food Safety Regulation. First, the content of my talk. Why do I study ideology? Why is it important? Second, I apply evolutionary science to ideological change. Why is it justified? Well, the application of evolutionary science produces two hypotheses. I will explain them, and then I will test them later. And finally, the conclusions. Well, this is a cartoon about the recent peanut butter scare. Right? This reads, business can regulate itself. Well, why do people always blame business? The top graph shows federal food safety budget in the last decade. The bottom graph shows reported food poisoning cases during the same period. Right? The budget increased steadily, and the food poisoning cases didn't really change. It means regulation is not working. Right? Why don't people blame government? Why do they always blame business or the free market? This is my question. How this pro-government regulation came into being? I said I apply evolutionary thinking to ideological change. Why is it justified? 150 years ago, Charles Darwin published The Origin of Species. And in one paragraph, in the introduction to that book, he summarized his theory of evolution by natural selection. What he said is, well, there's variation among biological traits, right? And some of the biological traits are passed on to the next generation. They are hereditary. And there's selection among them. Well, some biological traits have better chances for survival. As a logical conclusion, he reasoned, evolution must occur. Organisms with biological traits with better chances for survival will increase in number. But then how about the ideology? Well, ideologies are composed of ideas, behaviors, and institutions. Well, there's variation among them. Well, these components are copied and learned and spread, right? And there's selection among them. Well, some ideas and behaviors are copied more than others. Well, therefore, as a logical conclusion, ideologies must evolve. Then what is expected of evolution? What will happen? Well, these free-floating ideas and institution behaviors will aggregate into co-adapted ideological complexes. Well, look at the colors, and then there's some, color consistency. Well, similar things have happened in the biological world, right? All organisms are co-adapted gene complexes. All genes in my body help one another to increase their survival rates. Likewise, well, a policy proposal for wealth redistribution can be easily picked up by people who already believe in social equality, right? These ideas help each other, right? Also, that policy proposal can spread itself better if it is institutionalized into a regulation and a government agency. So they have a similar color. So ideology is a hotly contested concept. There are many definitions. But based on its genesis and evolution, we can redefine ideology simply. Well, ideology is a naturally evolved complex consisting of mutually assisting ideas, collective behaviors, and social-political institutions. Well, when we study evolution, we look at selective factors, selective environment, because selective factors decide the direction of evolution. Well, there are two kinds of selective environment, or psychological and socio-economic. Well, I am focused on the socio-economic environment. Let me explain the psychological environment first. Well, please imagine numerous brains are forming a network. That's the psychological environment. And it is these human brains which pick up and store and spread ideological components. Ideological components such as ideas and behaviors with strong psychological appeal will be picked up and copied more than others. Well, for example, an economic policy which exploits human insecurity about future will be copied and spread. Well, but the psychological environment doesn't function in a social vacuum. Well, social factors influence human brain's initial exposure to ideas. Then the main part of my topic. Well, I focus on government information supply as a dominant selective factor in the socio-economic environment because there are three reasons. Well, first, pro-regulatory ideologies are so dominant now. So therefore, we cannot ignore government agencies as the target of my study. Second, for government engage in PR activities, they issue consumer warnings. Therefore, government interferes with the information we are exposed to. Third, the tax-funded nature of government activities makes them different, from private sector players in society. Let me explain that further. Well, evolutionary thinking produces two hypotheses, and let me explain these hypotheses first, and I will test them later. Well, as I said, government agencies are funded with tax. It means they have secure resources. That makes them as a kind of nucleus component in the ideological complex around which other ideas or institution behaviors gather and grow, right? And pro-regulatory ideas are one of them. And then because government doesn't have to adjust its information commodities according to ever-changing consumer preferences, so therefore government can supply the same pro-government ideas consistently and persistently. Well, in addition to that, we human beings unfortunately tend to believe what people around us are always saying. So it's called human conformity bias. As a result, we will have a little bit, increased support for government agencies. And that go back to, tax. And this is a cycle, and this is how government information supply grows over time. The second hypothesis and the title of my talk. Well, a mutualism between bureaucrats and academics emerges. A mutualism is a mutually beneficial relationship. There are many examples in the biological world. People who are interested in insects or gardening might know the relationship between aphid and ants. Well, aphids are tiny insects, and which give honeydew, a kind of sweet substance, to ants. But they are defenseless, and they are attacked by predators and eaten. But ants, in return for honeydew, protect aphids against their predators. Similar things will happen or happening between bureaucrats and academics, because bureaucrats give funding to academics, and academics, in return for the funding, provide theoretical justification for agencies, mandates, and budgets, right? This is a kind of cycle. In the process, new institutional ideological components such as academic societies, academic journals, and research institutions, graduate schools are created, and then they strengthen the ideological complex. These are two hypotheses. Let me test these two hypotheses. Well, first, the hypothesis, and the question is, how dominant government is over the information supply? Well, I chose Google News as our representative information pool, and I did a survey using food safety and policy, right? And total hits about 567 accessible articles, 180, and articles actually relevant to the keywords were 59. Now I read all of them, and I assessed every institution's contribution as news sources to the information pool. News sources are interviews and citations. Okay, this is the result. Big surprise. Government agencies dominate as information sources. Right? They provided more than 30% of the information. They're followed by food industry, journalists and authors, and consumer advocacy groups, and university academics. If we add university academics who are funded by government agencies, then government agencies as a whole account for more than 36% of the information. This is the same data about the different organizations. The USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, provided more than 12% of the information, followed by the FDA and Food and Drug Administration, provided 9.5% of the information. The USDA, by the way, is the top spender of federal food safety money, and the FDA is the second spender of federal food safety budget. They were followed by Monsanto, a biotech company, and the Center for Food Safety, a consumer advocacy group, and the Grocery Manufacturers Association, a trade association. The result clearly showed government dominance of the information supply. What does this mean? This means that since 1862, when President Lincoln set up a federal office that would develop into the FDA and the USDA, these two federal agencies, have grown to become the two most dominant information suppliers in the field. I don't know the exact shape of this curve, but the growth is undeniable. Well, the testing of the hypothesis too. The question is how dominant government is in research funding. I looked at the University Economics because I couldn't find a category like food safety policy analysts. And I chose University Economics because food safety policy making involves a lot of cost-benefit analysis. So in 2007, $190 million were provided by federal agencies, and that amount accounted for 35% of their total funding. And again, within the federal funding, the USDA, the top spender of federal food safety money, contributed 20% of the federal. The results showed government dominance in research funding. Well, and the next question was, how dominant government in academic publishing? Well, I chose a journal, academic journal, Food Safety Policy, because of its emphasis on food policy issues. I did a survey using food safety as a keyword, and the total hit 46 articles. I read them, and the result is government-affiliated authors, basically bureaucrats, authored 26% of these articles, and then government agencies funded 29% of these articles. Somehow these lines didn't overlap, so we can add them, and as a result, we can say that, well, government agencies as authors or fund providers contribute 55% of these articles. Again, the results showed government dominance of academic publishing. There's no question about that. Conclusion. Government information supply has grown. It means government keeps spreading pro-regulatory ideas. Second, a mutualism between bureaucrats and academics exists. And what does it mean? Well, economic theories which support more government intervention are produced and spread. I hope my presentation has shown that evolutionary thinking is useful to understand how ideologies are changing currently. Thank you very much.